Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And for those of you who've joined us for the other episodes in this series, you know that musical intro was a little more relaxing than the other two. We started a little more raucous the last couple times, so it's kind of a nice pace to kick off at. So again, thank you for joining us for today's webinar discussion. This is the third conversation in our three-part Startup Refresh series. Thank you all for participating throughout and joining us today for this conversation about business entity formation and impact. My name is Melissa Rouse. I am the Communications Director for Food System 6, and I'm going to provide a short introduction before handing over to our exciting panel of speakers to run through this conversation. Just cue up here. So just for a brief overview of how the next hour or so is going to go, I'm going to run through a little bit about the Food System 6 programs, our upcoming cohort programming season, as well as introduce our exciting panel of speakers. Today we're joined by Lindsay Lesher-Shute. She's the CEO and founder of Farm Generations Cooperative, the co-founder of National Young Farmers Coalition, and also a Cohort 5 entrepreneur for Food System 6. So we are excited to have her joining us. And Lindsay will be joined by Mark White, a partner at White Summers Law Firm, and Renska Line, general partner of First Course Capital, and also a co-founder of Food System 6. So the three of them will be led in discussion by our trustee CEO, Cesare Assad, who I will hand it over to in a bit to kind of guide us through this conversation and, navigate us through kind of the panel and the topic. One thing I do want to say before we kick into that portion of the conversation is that we will be conducting this panel more conversationally than some of your, traditional Zoom panels. So what that means for you is as you have questions that come up through the conversation, please feel free to drop them into the comment box. The FS6 team will be monitoring that, and we'd love to, as we're on a topic, feel free to plug your questions into that topic rather than waiting just till the Q&A at the end. So at any point as questions come up, feel free to drop them in, and we will do our best to get to them. We will have about 10 minutes of Q&A at the end of the panel discussion to get through unanswered questions. And then we will wrap at 11 with that portion of the conversation, and we will kick into our rollover time. At the very end, we will have about 15 minutes of opportunity to talk a little bit more about the upcoming Food System 6 program. Any questions for interested applicants who are in that pipeline. So that'll go until about 11:15. If you are here just for the webinar portion, feel free to hop off after the panel Q&A, and we will remind you at that time. All right, so for a little bit more about Food System 6, for those of you who do not know, we are a nonprofit business accelerator designed to support food and agriculture entrepreneurs who are building a more resilient, inclusive, and vibrant food system. The FS6 Accelerator program supports impact-driven startups by building bridges between founders and the resources that they need to increase their impact and scale their success. Whether that means communication support, business acumen training like we're doing today, one-on-one connections to our mentor community, and networking opportunities within and across our teams and our portfolio. Food System 6 supports solutions that are addressing the food system and changing it across our 4 pillars of impact. So our pillars are healthy people, sustainable ecosystems, vibrant farms, and justice and fairness. By focusing on healthy people, we want to make sure that innovations we're working with recognize the relationship between the food system and the people that support it along the way. We are working with companies that promote healthy, sustainable, and vibrant farms by prioritizing the health and safety of farmers, farm workers, and farm animals throughout their lives. And we work to promote sustainable ecosystems by supporting innovations that protect and improve soil, water, air, and energy quality by reducing or eliminating contaminants and protecting biodiversity. And last but certainly not least, FS6 strives for a more just and fair food system by supporting innovations that decrease food insecurity, protect the rights of workers across the food supply chain, and affirm diversity. So we are currently running a call for applicants for our 7th cohort of entrepreneurs. The stage 1 applications are due tomorrow. So this is our wrap up of our application season for cohort 7. If you've already requested a stage 1 app and you haven't sent it in, do so now. The application deadline for stage 2 is a little further down the line, and once we review the kind of initial stage gate of those stage 1 apps, we will follow up with more additional information. We will select 6 to 8 companies to join us for the program from April 5th through July 2nd for virtual programming in lead up to a culminating forum event at the end of July. For this program, we do support all entity types, and we will of course get into that more today in conversation, but that means for-profit, nonprofit, co-op, and other, so we can dive into that more. And if you have questions about that, of course, stick around for the end of the conversation. And lastly, eligible participants for cohort 7 will receive a $25,000 safe note from our partners at First Course Capital. And if you have more questions about that as well, we have Renska joining us today from First Course Capital, and she can answer questions about that as well. So that, I believe, is the end of the introduction from me. Without further ado, I would like to hand the mic over to Food System 6 CEO Cesare Assad to take us through this next portion of our conversation. Thanks, Cesare.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. And thank you all for taking some time to join us. As Melissa said, these are really about building community, having a conversation. It's helpful for us to learn more about what you all are thinking about. And our amazing experts have graciously agreed many times to join us for many conversations. So I know this won't be the last opportunity to talk with them, but as it goes, I would love to just really kind of focus on their expertise and have them share a little bit about their backgrounds and really for each of them, I've had a lot of time to get to know them all, and it's all their work really comes from a place of wanting to leave this world in a better place. So I think they're really quite exceptional folks to help us talk about it. So I think maybe just starting with Lindsay and then Mark and Renska, introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your background and perspective on this topic.
Sure, thanks, Cesare. It's great to see everyone on the line talking about this actually very important and interesting topic when you're thinking about starting a business that will take over your life for some portion of time, and you really want to get it right. When I was in preparation for this conversation, I was thinking back through all of my endeavors, and I realized I formed an LLC, been part of an S Corp, a 501c3. I've been fiscally sponsored. I've fiscally sponsored other groups. I've led volunteer initiatives with no organization at all. Now I've formed a Minnesota Agricultural Cooperative, and now I'm looking to form a hybrid sort of entity. So I've learned a lot about the outcomes of all of these different entity types, and the limitations and the opportunities presented from a business perspective. And really, I guess the most important thing in just kicking things off for me and in this conversation is just the why. Like, why are you doing it and what do you need, really, right? So if you're wanting to change a piece of legislation or a bill, or have a advocacy organization, maybe you can do that just with volunteers. But then if you want to start to hire people and you want to increase your impact and be able to organize more broadly, like the National Young Farmers Coalition, that's when a 501c3 really was the right entity type for me in starting Young Farmers Coalition. But we actually started as a fiscally sponsored group because we just didn't even want to deal with all of the requirements, auditing requirements and whatnot for a 501c3. So we started off, working with another partner entity, and then we finally got our own charitable status. And groups like Young Farmers Coalition sometimes also start entities where they can do political work, where they can do more legislative work, et cetera, which is in a direction that I took Young Farmers Coalition while I was there. But you sort of have to follow a path based on your needs and really what you're trying to accomplish. In that case, I wanted to organize young farmers all across the country, offer them technical support and organizing. So we needed grant funding, we need to engage philanthropies and government agencies, and the C3 was the right thing for us to pursue. While I was at Young Farmers Coalition, one of the issues that I grew very frustrated around was just the lack of income for young and beginning farmers, and this persistent, just low income that many farmers couldn't break through, and felt like we needed to work together as farmers to increase our market share. There's plenty of demand for food. We need to be able to capture that more as a community, and the nonprofit entity wasn't quite enough to take us there. And that's when I started researching and getting really excited about this idea of cooperatives. And the Farm Generations Cooperative is a cooperative focused on technology, specifically building an app called Grown By that will be released very soon that helps farmers sell directly to consumers. So that co-op right now, we're figuring out what we need actually in the future. So how do we capitalize this organization? The capital we've received so far has been from USDA, has been from private foundations, but into the future, what do we need? So we're actually at this point of figuring out, is the co-op alone going to be adequate to meet our goals? So I guess that's the main thing. It's like you really have to evaluate the capital you're going to need, the goals of the organization, and the limitations and the opportunities that each might present. And I think you can find out some of that maybe like in a textbook or online, but really you need to talk to people who have run all of these different types of organizations to figure out, what is the experience that they've had.
Thank you, Lindsay. I just wanted to add that you're also a farmer. I'm not sure.
Oh, yes. Right. So there are nonprofit farms. We don't have a nonprofit farm. And that's an important choice for me, right? That we are running a business that's viable, that can hire 15 people a year. There are farms that have chosen to be nonprofit organizations because they want to focus more on technical support and education programs and that type of thing. So even within farming, right, within farms, this entity choice really matters when it comes to defining the business and the overall goals and mission of the company.
Mark, as someone who I would imagine, I could say this with confidence, you've seen it all. Would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your background?
Sure, I'm happy to do that, Cesare. So hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. This should be a great conversation. I do know a lot about these topics. I wear a number of hats. I am the founding partner of White Summers. It's a boutique transactional firm, corporate firm. We have offices in the US and in Europe. We work with the venture capital community, private equity, and tech companies. Profits, for-profit companies, non-for-profit companies. We've seen everything on the journey of companies from inception through an exit. I think Lindsay has said it correctly. Every company, all of you on this call are on a journey. And you've got to kind of figure out what's important to you, who your constituency is, and what it is that you want to create. And I would say this. on our conversation, I think what you're going to hear is that you can change on a dime. You can pivot and you can change your business model, and you can create hybrid organizations like the one that, that Lindsay is speaking to. And it's all based on where you want to go. Who do you want to serve with your organization? Is it your investors? Is it the community at large? Is it specific targeted customers that make sense to you? And the structural entities that you can choose to further that mission are available, and you're not put into a box, just so you know. And so I think in this conversation, we can talk about the technical aspects of what it is to be a C corporation, S corporation, LLC, benefit company, a non-for-profit, either a 501c3 or 6, but there's a mix and match of everything. And so you're not stuck in one category, just so you know. And you can change the definition of your business as you go along based on the requirements of the community. I don't know any company that started out on day one saying, we're going to be doing this all the way through and stick to that, because you always change based on the dynamics of the industry, your competitors, and who is important to you. And actually, it's not your decision. It's the decision of the constituents that you define as being important to you. So it's the members of your mutual benefit corporation, or it's your stockholders, or your consumers. So for example, Lindsay said, yeah, she's a farmer and she's working with farmers. And the farmers are saying they need technology to further their mission of being efficient in their operations. So she's created this new technology company to further the requirements of farmers that told her what she needs. And the point is, you get into any organization and business and you adapt. And so what I find exciting about this conversation is how do you basically adapt to these inflection points in growth and your redefinition of what it is that's important based on what you hear from your community. So yeah, I'm a lawyer, but these issues are based not on what I think, it's based on what you think and what's important to you. And I'm very curious to hear what you all, the questions you're asking and what's going on in your organizations. And the one thing I'd like to say is that there's an answer to everything. There's no such thing as saying, boy, we're stuck, we made a mistake, we can't get out of this hole. You can always get out of it. There's always a way. So, I'm happy to talk about it. Just 2 more points. Aside from your constituency, you got to be concerned about taxes. Taxes drive everything. They really do. Because even if you're saying that's not important, we have a social mission that we're trying to pursue. It's important to the people that support you. It's important to the people that receive the benefits that you're providing. So taxes really are critical here. The other is, what's the end game? Do you want to sell your organization? Do you want to provide benefits forever? Is this a perpetual motion machine? What it is it, not only what is your mission, but, is this going to go on for 5 years, 20 years, forever? You have to define that, because it actually helps you on day one, what your starting point has to be. So just keep that in mind. Okay, Cesare.
Thanks, Mark. I hope everyone is taking notes. I find this convo also very exciting, which admittedly, I'm a big nerd, but identifying the types of business entities for impact, is one of the reasons why I run a nonprofit business accelerator. And so this stuff gets me going, and I know it gets my colleague Renska going as an entrepreneur who has, I think, gone down some wormholes to learn things on behalf of those of us working to advance the food system. So Renska, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself and some of these fascinating wormholes you've journeyed down?
They're absolutely fascinating wormholes. So we're in good company together here, all of us on the call, that this is something that gets us this lit up. But obviously it is so critical to the change that all of you on this call want to make happen in the world. And just to underscore the importance of what both Mark and Lindsay shared. So there are answers, and also there is a lot of creativity that can be put to work in terms of advancing your mission. So I don't think I have created as many entities as Lindsay or Mark. But I am definitely, relatively fluent in the nonprofit landscape, and then, increasing my fluency now as a mentor in terms of the needs and expectations, of that particular form of capital. So I don't have necessarily much more to add in terms of what Lindsay and Mark shared here, but just to say that it is really, really important as you are making decisions, as you are moving through your own path and your journey, to find trusted advisors and people who are really aligned with what you are attempting and trying to achieve and the change that you are trying to make happen. Because I think if you have that fundamental alignment in terms of, the folks that you have around the table, then, as Mark said, the world is your oyster. And as Lindsay has proven, there are so many different ways that you can, get out there and build the right structure for what you're trying to do. So I can't underscore the importance of that enough. It's, a big part of the reason that we founded Food System 6, and that we're really excited about the opportunity to continue to partner with the entrepreneurs there, because we firmly believe that innovation just takes many, many forms, and it is, our duty to support the entrepreneurs that are trying to change our food system for the better and bringing as many tools to bear as possible. So I'm super excited to dig in on some of the nitty gritty here.
Thanks, Rinska. So, I mean, I have plenty of questions, and I luckily get to talk to these folks pretty often. I would love to encourage, if you all have questions, please, feel free, drop them in the chat. As Melissa said, you can also just unmute and ask your questions. Just kind of let us know. I'm trying to keep an eye on that. But I think in the meantime, while we're letting you guys stew on it, here we go. Can we talk a bit more about the factors that influence our entity choice? I think you guys all touched on those a bit. That was actually going to be my next question, so perfect. But are some that are able to make a social impact? What are the implications of taxes? I think it's really like, what are the trade-offs of different entity types? And then, if Bevins, if you'd like to add anything additional to that question, feel free to do that.
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I was just wondering how, yeah, I know she was about to answer, but yeah, I was just wondering exactly how that worked. Like, what is a C Corp compared to an LLC, a nonprofit? Like, what differences does that make in the practicals of running the business day to day? Like, how would that impact it?
Yeah, so this is Mark. I'll give you the 3-minute answer. I'll go through briefly different corporate types. So in the for-profit world, there are 4 kinds of corporations that you can choose from: a C Corp, an S Corp, a limited liability, or a benefit corporation. A C corporation and a benefit corporation are taxable entities. And so if there are profits made by the company, by the business, there's tax at the entity level. An S corporation and a limited liability company have no tax at the entity level. That's good and it's bad, because what happens is, for a pass-through corporation like an S corporation or a limited liability company, if you're making money and you want to reinvest back in the business with retained earnings, the principals that own that company, the stockholders in an S Corp or the unit holders in a limited liability company, are taxed, even though the profits that are retained for further investment for future years is retained at the corporate level and not passed through to the stockholders. So the anomaly there is when you're losing money and you want to take, and you're an equity holder in an S Corp or an LLC, and you want to take and harvest those losses against other sources of income, it's great. When you're making money and the money just passes through and it's not a capital intensive corporation, then an S Corp or an LLC are ideal. So for example, like real estate, and in entertainment, for example, you've got a property, it's making money, you don't have to reinvest back in the business, it's a cash machine, it's wonderful. But in a tech company, for example, if you want to reinvest back in the business, an S Corp and an LLC doesn't make sense. Now, here's the thing you can do. and actually this is an involved conversation, but you can morph from one structure to another. So early on when you have losses, you know, many companies, they start out as an S Corp or an LLC, and I can explain to you the difference between the two, but maybe that's an offline conversation. But you can change later when you start to retain earnings, make money, and you want to reinvest back in the business. Take that and set it aside to the nonprofit world where there's no tax at all. You know, and so what happens is you have these entities that are non-for-profits, and if your mission is to do good for the community, you are a foundation or a charity, and that's under section 501c3. If you're serving members in a community, not the public at large, you're a mutual benefit corporation. That's a 501c6. Most corporations are, you know, they're for-profit. And so you're a C Corp, S Corp, LLC, and a benefit corporation. Let's talk about that, and then we'll move on. This is really important. Historically, companies are set up to make money for their owners. That's their mission. That's what they do. And if you don't make money for your stockholders or try to, then you as the founder of that business can be basically sued for not meeting your obligations to your stockholders. A benefit corporation gets you out of that hole. A benefit corporation is a legal entity that allows you to basically redefine your fiduciary obligations. So not only is your mission to make money for the people that support you, but also for the constituency that you name in your articles of incorporation or in your bylaws. So it's a new creation that allows you to basically expand the definition of what is the purpose of the corporation. And it's wonderful because it gets you off this fiduciary obligation just to make money for the folks that support you at the outset. And so that's why companies actually use that designation. So again, really the types you ought to consider are C Corp, S Corp, limited liability company, or a benefit corporation. Really, that's the universe right there.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Mark?
Sure.
Because it's my understanding that you are also able to indicate in your bylaws if you are, you know, an entity type that is not a benefit corporation that you intend to, you know, aspire towards or achieving a particular, you know, set of values or impact, right? That you
That's
you're not mandated to explicitly codify that your only intent and purpose is to, you know, maintain or, you know, achieve profit to the expense of anything else. Is that right?
You know, you're absolutely right, Renske. So really the default for companies is that you just, you know, you incorporate, you identify the capitalization of the company shares, and that's it. You don't say what your purpose is. If you want to say what your purpose is, you then default and you're a benefit corporation, and you can define your purpose any way you wish. And so it's a statement to the world. Not only is it a legal designation that expands your definition of who you're responsible to, but it's a branding statement as well, and it's embedded in your charter documents. You're absolutely right.
And then that is, you know, an ability that you then have, you know, to be able to, you know, align around that around the table as,
That
you know,
is
in terms of your
correct.
future investors, while also achieving the sense of, you know, comfort that I know, for example, you know, myself and other investors are looking for as far as entity type is concerned. So and maybe Mark, if I can follow up here,
Sure,
also
sure.
just while we're on this topic, talk about the difference between a benefit corp and a B, because I think we've got some unfortunate semantic confusion in the ecosystem about the meaning.
Yeah.
And intent. So you add a little bit there.
Yeah. So a benefit corporation is a legal entity. It's a legal type, and we just discussed it. You put into your certificate of incorporation if you're in Delaware, or in your bylaws, either of those documents, what your mission is, and so that is part of what the corporate entity is. A B certified corporation is something different. That could be a C Corp, it could be an S Corp, it could be a limited liability company, but it is a certification from an outside body that basically runs you through a questionnaire of what do you stand for, what do your products and services do, and what community do you support. And if you meet their certification, then it's like the Good Housekeeping brand of approval. You're certified to have this social mission or this environmental direction. as a company doing good. That's not a legal designation. It's more of a certification for how you're presenting yourself to your target customers, really. So that's the distinction between the two. Benefit corporation is a legal entity. B certification, different, could be any kind of corporation, but you're certifying what you do to your targeted beneficiaries, your customers.
So another question for you, Mark.
Yes.
From the rest of the panel. It's funny, I like take notes when I hear Mark talk about, and Renske too, because anyways, we're all on a learning journey here, including me. And I think that that's actually a very important part of being a successful entrepreneur, is just, taking every little opportunity you can get to learn. But one thing that I thought would be important in this conversation is to talk about exit in all of these entity types. Like where do you want to get, right? This is what you want to do, what you want to sell, the impact you want to have on the world. But where the things really change is when you're thinking about exit. And that's actually been something that has certainly been on my mind a lot. In the case of a cooperative, generally there is not an exit, right? Cooperatives persist for over 100 years in some cases, but that's at odds perhaps with expectations of investors looking to support certain types of entities. So Mark, I just wondered if you could also sort of touch on that.
No,
that's also, and make that distinction between the non-for-profit and for-profit entities, which I know came up as a question here.
Okay, so I'm going to do this at a very high level because it's actually a very complicated answer to your question. If you're not looking for an exit for the entity, but you're looking for a return on your investment as you go every year, a limited liability and an S Corp probably are your choices, because what happens is every year you get a distribution, either pro rata or a special distribution of the profits from the company. So in an S Corp or an LLC, if the company's making $1 million and you've got two entity holders, each 50-50, they'd each get $500,000, and that's not bad. And you don't have to sell the company. Every year you get this, it's great. So small businesses sometimes have that. If you're gonna make money on the value of the enterprise itself, a C corporation is the preferred entity type, right? Now let's talk about that, because there's two kinds of exit scenarios. One is where you sell stock. The other is where you sell assets to a buyer. A buyer may not want to buy your stock because then they inherit all the liabilities that have accumulated over the years in your company. And even if they don't know what they are and you say, oh, my company's clean, they can say, we're not going to buy your company. We'll buy your assets instead. You keep the company. Now, if you do that, an asset sale is taxable to the entity that sold the assets. So you're taxed at the entity level if you're a C corporation once, and then you're taxed again when you get the money out of the C corporation to the stockholders, all right? And you don't have that problem if you're an S corporation, because an S corporation is a pass-through entity. So between those two types, you could say in an asset sale, an S corp is way better, and on sale of stock, they're actually the same. The problem is you can't figure out now, when you start a company in 2021 and you sell it in 2025, what kind of exit you're going to get. And you can say, well, I'll just negotiate with the buyer at that time and say, I'm not going to do an asset sale, I'm going to do a stock sale, right? But you've got to basically think this through. Now, the answer is you probably default to an S corporation anyway, because with an asset sale, you can navigate around it. There's a section of the tax code, section 368C. It's a type C reorganization is what it's called. And if you sell stock, if you sell assets and 80% of the consideration back to you is stock from the buyer, then the rest is non-taxable to you, but you got to shut down your company as part of that. And so it gets more complex. But here's my basic answer to you, Lindsay. Start as a C corporation. When you get to the end of the road and you got to sell one way or the other, you have more options on tax deferral with an S corp than anything else. So that's your preferred entity type.
Can I jump in here, Cesare?
Please.
Yeah, just a bit of a follow-on here, but also both a follow-on and back a little bit in terms of Mark. This will be to you. So most entrepreneurs that I I come across these days that are, just starting out, are typically advised to form as an LLC in terms of their ability to, take the losses, right?
Yep.
From a tax standpoint. So maybe speak a little bit about off of that relative to establishing as an S corp, which my understanding, again, not a lawyer, that's why we have one here, that also able to, in the same way, take those losses, but then upon an investor that, or a fund that comes in, and this is where I'll lean on you to clarify, there's an automatic transition to a C corp. Is that right? Which then spares you the expense of doing a conversion.
Yeah. So there's a couple of
right?
Yeah. So a couple of things. An S corp can't have more than 75 stockholders, and it can't have more than one class of shares. Those restrictions don't apply to a limited liability company. The other thing is an S corp has to have U.S. nationals as the entity holders, and you cannot have an entity hold stock in an S corp. So there's like 3 strikes and you're out with an S corp. So then you default to a limited liability company. You are correct. You can start as an LLC or an S corp, and then you can basically file a conversion document, or you just you disqualify yourselves as an S corp when you do a preferred stock financing. You automatically become a C corp, and you can harvest the losses before that happens. Now here's the problem: qualified small business stock. Most venture investors and actually founders today are very concerned about avoiding tax if they hold their stock for 5 years. It's called qualified small business stock under section 1202 of the Internal Revenue Code. It's a great benefit. You start your company, you get qualified small business stock, you hold the damn thing for 5 years, and you sell it, and you have no tax. It's wonderful, right? You don't get it if you start as an LLC or an S corp. You blow it. Okay, so then you say, okay, so am I prepared to give up the losses now to get qualified small business stock from day one? Well, that kind of depends on your mindset, right? You either get the small benefits now of a loss pass through, or you get QSBS stock, and the company does well, and everybody starts a company because they think they're going to do well. So I think for most entrepreneurs that I work with, they actually, when you frame it that way, which is, what do you want? Do you want QSBS stock, or do you want the losses now? They say, well, I'm going to make $1 gazillion. I'd rather get the qualified small business stock. And I think that's the right answer.
Just invite everybody to take a deep breath. I think, probably maybe Renska, you could kind of take this and then ping it around. I think I'll try to take a couple of these questions into one. But I think Renska, you could probably talk a little bit about the safe note, and if could be beneficial for investors who are offering a safe note to make a loss on that. It's one of the questions that we have, and I think in general, you and I were talking a little bit about trying to understand some of the strategy and tactic around this. So maybe you're still working your way around understanding it yourself. But just this idea that it could be beneficial for investors to take a loss when they're making a safe investment, and probably at an earlier stage.
Yeah, I actually do think if Mark is able to take that, he's probably going to have the more nuanced answer there. But I'd love to also come back to, I see some of the questions in the chat too, just to talk a little bit at some point about impact metrics and sort of how are stakeholders defining that, which I think bears relationship to entity type, particularly as you're thinking about the stakeholders that you need to bring along on your journey. I'm gonna ping it to Mark.
Yeah, so on the question of the difference between a promissory note, a convertible promissory note, and a safe investment, there actually is a very significant distinction between the two. A note is a debenture. It's an obligation of the company to pay back or convert. And there are conversion provisions in the note itself that basically determine whether the note is paid back ever or not. But it is an obligation that sits on the balance sheet of the company, and legally, a note is required to pay interest to the holder. You can't get out of it. A safe agreement is an investment contract. It doesn't bear interest. And it's much more favorable to the company. So what it does is it's an investment under a contract that converts into stock later on. But if the company doesn't do a conversion financing, for example, or becomes insolvent, there's no obligation sitting on the balance sheet to pay it back. And so it's not as favorable to the holders. But the dynamics in the market today are SAFE was introduced more than 5 years ago by Y Combinator. A lot of investors didn't know really what the distinction was between a note and a SAFE. Now everybody knows, more or less. And a SAFE is actually a better instrument for the company. And so for seed stage financings, the SAFE instrument is much preferred and it's more commonly used. To protect holders of SAFEs, if the company becomes insolvent, you can put provisions in the instrument, in the agreement, that provide that on a wind down of the company, SAFE holders are treated the same as creditors, all right? And so you can protect them on the downside as well. But the basic distinction is one bears interest, the other doesn't. One sits on the balance sheet, the other doesn't.
All right, so I'm going to do just a little bit of pivoting here, and we've got a lot of, I know we got a lot of questions, and we certainly won't get to them all today, but we will try to do some follow-up here. I think there's a bigger question around just in general transitioning between entity types. I know Cecily, you asked about just kind of what do you look out for from an LLC to a C Corp. We've certainly supported entrepreneurs through this, and it can be really wild. And there's just a lot of things that come up. So I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about, just some of the, perhaps some of the triggers or, the things to watch out for, and then also talk, transition a little more to talking about nonprofit entities, and a little bit around some of the co-op models. And just, a distinction I wanted to make here for Nancy is, I think with the language we're using, some people will say nonprofit, not-for-profit, those typically are the same, referring to a 501c3 entity. So just that quick clarifier. But yeah, so Mark, really, Lindsay, Renska, anyone, some of the things to watch out for when you're transitioning entity types.
Okay, so if you're going, sorry.
I was just going to jump in and say a few things and then actually ping it to you, Mark. So, but
okay.
just in term, Mark shared a little bit about some of the triggers that, might warrant your decision to pivot entities from, an LLC C Corp. And so again, it is very much defined by your stakeholders and sort of their expectations and their needs. And Mark can maybe add a little bit more color to that. Importantly, because you are transitioning entities, anytime you are transitioning entities, you also need to recognize that you need to transition everything else that is associated with those entities. So I think this is something that a lot of entrepreneurs don't know as they're starting this process of making these entity considerations, is that there is time and cost associated. You need to create new bank accounts, right? There's a lot of considerations, and if you're under any time pressure, which all entrepreneurs are, to make those decisions, it just it can be much more cumbersome, and so you need to really anticipate in advance. And then I do think it would be great if we could, if we don't run out of time, which I'm sure we will, talk about the way in which for-profit and non-profit entities can and in some instances should interact. So we've, Mark has supported a number of FS6 companies that, started as for-profit companies and realized that a really important part of advancing their mission. And again, this is all about the why and all about the North Star and where are you trying to get, that it made sense for them to develop a nonprofit entity to, achieve a particular part of their mission. So hopefully we'll have some time to talk about that too. All right, Mark, over to you.
Sure. So you're correct, Renska, that converting from one corporation type to another can be troublesome unless you're in Delaware. So the state of Delaware is a favorable jurisdiction for a variety of reasons, but on this topic of transition, it's better than California, for example, or from one state to another. So if you're a Delaware limited liability company and you convert by filing a conversion document in Delaware to a C corporation, you keep the same identification. It's the same corporation, a different type. And so the issue that you pointed out about having a new employer identification number, which is your designation, it's your number of identity for the company. You don't have that problem if you stay within the same domicile, which would be Delaware. If you're going from one state to the next, however, so you've got a California limited liability company, now you say, well, I want to be in Delaware because my investors are insisting that I be in Delaware, and investors typically do for another reason, which is fiduciary, liability. Then you've got a problem, because then you've got to set a whole new company in Delaware. You got to move everything over, bank account, get a new identification number. So everything you talked about, it's a problem, right? But if you start in Delaware, you're going to end up in Delaware anyway. If you go from a from a pass-through company to a Delaware company, you're going to fund it with venture or private equity or any institutional investors. That's the default of where they want to be. We could talk about that as well. So that's the way you navigate it to make it an easy transition. And we can talk about hybrids between profits and nonprofits, but that's another conversation.
Lindsay, are there particular questions that you want to raise, just kind of related to some of the experiences that you've either had or are having with regards to, the nonprofit, co-op, I would frame just alternative types of entities? I'm just putting you on the spot.
Sure. Well, I think it's probably worth just explaining what a cooperative is, if anyone is uncertain of what that means. So the type of, I can't speak to all of the different types of cooperatives. We have a marketing cooperative, farm generations cooperative. It is a Minnesota agricultural cooperative. The state of Minnesota has there's a lot of cooperatives in Minnesota, and there's a very developed set of state laws that we decided to incorporate under. So we have a one member, one vote co-op, meaning that the only true equity holders, owners of the farm generations cooperatives, in our bylaws, they have to be producers. They have to be agricultural producers, and a farmer can buy into the co-op with a member equity share, and co-ops price. There's a variety of ways. Sometimes co-ops make a required annual payment of a percentage of the sales that you do under the co-op as your sort of annual contribution. Ours is structured as a member equity share that you purchase, and then you're a member of the co-op, and then you can get dividends back based on your patronage in that cooperative. So essentially all of the profits that the cooperative makes, those that are not retained by the cooperative are distributed among the member owners of the co-op. And the reason I pursued this is because I wanted to do two things. I wanted to create a national cooperative for direct market growers because one didn't exist. And I thought there was so much that we could do as a community together. And I wanted to use technology to support farmers more effectively and give farmers an equity stake in the future of food and online sales. So we created this app, Grown By, that right now is entirely owned by the Farm Generations Cooperative. And what we're learning, essentially is that this type of entity, this cooperative, there's some real challenges in capitalizing it if you can't do that entirely with your membership. Some cooperatives can do that. Their farmer members are well resourced enough, or the scale of the company is such that the capital needed is just more well matched with what members can provide at the outset. With technology, you need a ton of investment at the beginning to be remotely competitive. So that's the core challenge that we're dealing with right now. Like, how do we raise enough capital as a group of farmers to make a product that is really competitive on the marketplace? The co-op thus far, as I said earlier, has been supported by foundations and USDA. Foundations can make grants to for-profit entities like cooperatives, and more of them are doing that. More of them are also thinking about providing investment to companies directly as part of their mission with a mission or program related investment. So it's a new area, and I think we need more people in it to actually figure out how do we do all of this, right? How do we give, in my case, farmers the opportunity to own technology, right? Maintain that mission, and have a company that can do well and have the capital it needs to succeed. Does that answer your question, Cesare? I mean, which is a totally different consideration than a nonprofit, right? Where we existed totally on grant funding and, individual contribution and membership. And the way we, went about capitalizing Young Farmers Coalition was, it was much more scalable over time, right? We started with a lot of volunteers. I was a volunteer for many months. We were able to sort of build up relationships and capacity over time. In the case of a tech company, it's much harder unless I was a programmer and just could do it here in my office, with much less capital. It's just not possible. So I think one of the key considerations is what is the kind of capital that you need to do well, and is your entity type fully supporting that?
Lindsay, you couldn't have set it up any better for my, I think, last question to just the panel, which is for Renske. I think if you could just talk a little bit about blended capital, impact reporting. Obviously we're covering a ton of ground in this conversation, but these are all parts of the considerations we all have to be making. So would you just talk a little bit about those two areas?
Absolutely. Yes. And I think Lindsay, again, she said it really well, is what product or service do you need to build to fulfill your North Star? Where are you headed? And the opportunities that I think we're trying to unearth here are that there is an enormous amount of flexibility in terms of how you build an entity around yourself, your product, your service, and get it to market and scale it as quickly as you can, because everybody is interested in scaling quickly because you want to have an impact. You want to continue to grow and expand your impact. So as Lindsay said, it is happening more where we're seeing, capital providers of all different kinds engaging in support entities that, they historically haven't. And so, it is, to your point, Lindsay, we do need more folks that are really out there pushing against this, because it is a matter of, having good partners, having great lawyers, and, folks around the table that can make sure that you are building things in the appropriate way. But there are many more opportunities now to, put different kinds of capital to work. And again, actually, these opportunities have always existed, but now there's more freedom and more flexibility and more willingness, because there are more entrepreneurs like all of you on this call that, want to embed impact into what you're building. So, it's, we I think unearthed some of the nuances of this, but, the way that we think about the capital is that, there are so many different avenues and so many different types of stakeholders and communities that you can bring to bear to help support. So, at Food System 6, it's a nonprofit organization, but it is supported by a range of entities, including foundations, including investment funds, right? There are, so in any event, there's a lot of opportunity if you just are out there really being clear around what you're trying to achieve, and then finding the right partners that can help you build the entity to achieve that. Again, the idea that you can be a for-profit organization or for-profit company that spins out a nonprofit, and that there can be a really mutually reinforcing relationship between those entities, is really just about making sure you've got all of your your I's dotted and your T's crossed in terms of the way those entities are constructed. So that's one thing I would say. And then as far as impact metrics, again, this is It's evolving as always, and there are impact metrics that investors are looking for, and those range. Some investors are looking to understand how does your entity work towards this United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So that that may be a metric or a framework that some investors are interested in. Other investors are increasingly interested in, what is your potential contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, right? And this spans, when I use investors, it's all types of investors, all types of, asset providers, be they for-profit, philanthropic investors, et cetera. And there's movement towards trying to align those as well. Fits and starts, but I think that and then there's, as we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, the B Lab certification, which is a very clearly defined set of expectations, and there's external validation that is looking at your reporting, and that whole process can be it's rigorous, and there's a fee associated, but it does reflect in the market as you are achieving a certain set of metrics around how you're building organization, your governance, your hiring practices. It's not just about the product or service that you have in the market. It's also about how are you building your company. Yeah, they're big topics, but I think the important thing to underscore is that it's not rocket science. There are great folks out there who are pushing against the sort of leading edge of thinking about how you leverage entity to achieve your impact. And again, it is really vital to find really trusted advisors and mentors that can help guide you through that process. Yeah.
Thank you, Rinska. I know we're butting right up against time, and we're going to post a poll. So those of you that are going to hop off, we'll be able to get a little feedback. We obviously are going to get into qualified small business stock and special capital gains tax rules in one of our future conversations. But appreciate the question. And just as time, Cervantes, I saw your question, and we'll address that as I kind of pivot into talking, specifically about the FS6 program and doing some Q&A on our upcoming open call for applicants. But this was just amazing. And I just really want to thank you, Lindsay, Rinska, Mark, Melissa, for all the prep you did, and all of you all for taking this time to join us. And yeah, there's a lot to kick into and cover at FS6. As I said, we'll be trying to produce more information. Participating in the poll gives us a better sense of what's valuable to you all, and we'll just keep plugging away together. So yeah, really appreciate you all so much. And Melissa, do you want to kind of pivot us over?
Yes, if I can get myself off mute, which it looks like I've done. So yeah, thank you guys for that incredibly informative discussion. I saw someone put in the notes about their frantic note taking, and I was right there with you. Just a ton to learn, and of course, no single hour conversation can ever kind of hold the container for all of the questions that could be asked. So yeah, thank you again to our speakers for diving into that with us, for our participants for asking your questions. And yeah, as Cesare said, I'm going to pivot to talk a little bit more about our upcoming Cohort 7 program. Again, the application deadline for that is tomorrow. If you are interested in that program, if you are in our applicant pipeline, please stick around. We're going to ask some questions. If you are not, feel free to hop off at this time. But I'm going to run through just a little bit of an overview of some of the kind of FAQs that come in frequently about our program, and then I'm going to open it up to talk more specifically about your individual questions. So are we good? Can you see my screen share? I'm going to say yes. All right. Oh, there's our polls. Okay, so just to address kind of the high level questions, first off around who should apply for the FS6 program. as you know, and as we've talked about a bit in this conversation already, Food System 6 supports impact-driven businesses solving for challenges up and down the food and ag ecosystem. So we're working with farmers, ranchers, processors, manufacturers, community leaders, entrepreneurs, and food businesses, all of whom are focused on building a stronger, more resilient, and more just food future. We work with early stage companies. So generally, if you are raising traditional capital, this means seed or pre-seed, although there's some flexibility depending on what kind of innovation that you are building. For nonprofits, that typically means that you are within 3 to 5 years of formation. If you are not sure if you are at the right stage for our program, I would highly recommend that you take 10 minutes or so to fill out a stage 1 application. We've designed our application process for this program to be 2-tiered because we know that you are incredibly busy running companies and you don't have a ton of time to be investing in filling out applications for programs that you are not potentially the right fit for. So our stage 1 application, you can request it on our website. It takes 10 minutes to fill out, and it really is geared at answering these kind of high-level stage gate questions around whether or not you are at the right stage, whether or not we are able to support you in your next milestones, and those types of high-level questions. So again, if you have questions about whether you are a fit from a stage perspective, do please just fill that out. The last piece on that front is, as we've discussed, we do support all entity types, for profit and nonprofit. There are variances in your eligibility for the First Course Capital Safe Note. So do check our FAQ on our website for more information about that piece. And then for the purposes of our core program, which this is, we support US-based companies or companies that are working on a US-based market entry. Occasionally we will run programs that have a more international focus, but primarily for our core program, that is just where our sort of bench of mentors has kind of the biggest strengths. So that's where we're focusing for this program. Let's see, who is next? Program timeline. So just to run through that quickly, as you know, and as I've mentioned, the stage 1 applications are due tomorrow, March 5th. For those who qualify based on our initial review of that stage 1 application, you will be sent on a rolling basis the stage 2 app, which will have an extended deadline. Of course, that is not due tomorrow. That'll be, we're looking at March 15th for the deadline on that stage 2 application if you qualify. We will then be interviewing applicants in mid-March, and we will be extending offers by the end of the month. Programming will kick off after Easter and will conclude at the end of July with our pitch event. So that is the kind of high level from me. I think now at this point, we can open up to questions from you all. And let me just get this up here because I know that there were some that came in. I'm going to stop my share just so I can see everyone's faces. But I think probably going back first to the question that came in from Cervantes about whether or not a restaurant operation plus technology enhancement is a fit for Food System 6 Accelerator. I can let you clarify on that, but my kind of initial response just to specifically your comment around 10xing, the beauty of being a nonprofit accelerator is that we are not a venture investment firm. We are not married to a 10x return. For us, we are looking at impact and the work that you are doing within your community to bolster and change this food system. So that is 10x returns is not a prerequisite for participation in our cohort, but feel free to hop in with any additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Hi, my question is regarding I'm in Los Angeles. A lot of independent restaurants, they have a very challenging time to get restarted after COVID. So still locked down on their dining room. So I'm thinking about do some, you won't be a nonprofit, but still for profit, but kind of helping the independent restaurant with a technology component to help them turn back again. Turn back again means they may have more online order, online pickup, all the technology component to operate restaurants. So it can be an investment business. and it involve a few of our restaurants here in Los Angeles. So I'm wondering, is that something F6, your systems accelerator can help us to continue to grow in this aspect?
Yeah, so I can respond to that briefly, and then maybe I'll ping it to Cesare to kind of round out my answer. But we have seen a lot of interesting businesses come out of course, the response to the pandemic. Of course, our food system needs a ton of support right now, and we're learning a lot about what areas are feeling stressed that we can invest in. So, I think absolutely from a mission perspective, it's really incredible to see kind of people rallying to that cause. Of course, the specifics of your business, we would need to see more of. The flag that would come up for me is potentially around the stage that you were at. Potentially, we generally are working with companies that already have a product in market or have some sort of market testing that has happened. And without knowing much about your company, I would say put in a stage 1 application. It may be a fit, but that would be the one flag that would stand out to me, is potentially it might be too early for a program, but the stage 1 app would answer that absolutely. Cesare, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I think that's great. I think Cervantes, there are, like, we have seen a number of different applications coming in around this. And I think, this is one of the areas where there's certainly an opportunity to do some landscape analysis and dig in. But as Melissa said, submit a stage 1. And with that, for us, what we're looking to understand is what are the challenges you're really facing over the next six months in particular. And are we best equipped to support that particular milestone that you're up against? In other words, is this program going to be an effective and good use of time based on where you're at in stage? So that is really helpful for us. And then also it does just get you into our pipeline and in relationships. So it might not be the right time for the formal cohort, but there might be issues coming up that we can easily help with through a phone call. So just starting the relationship, it's never too early to do that.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see I have a raised hand from Clifford. So Clifford, you're more than welcome to just unmute and ask your question. Or if it's easier, you're welcome to put it in the chat. I think I saw at some point that you're on a mobile device, so I know that can be a little, often a little harder. All right, I think I'm gonna pivot, Clifford. I don't know if there's a challenge in unmuting or dropping that in, whatever works for you, but I think while we figure that out, I will hand it over.
Okay.
I'm you got
in.
It.
Melissa, yeah, good evening. Good day.
Yes, good.
Well done.
Thank you. Go for it.
From Nigeria.
Hello from the other side of the world.
So my product is targeting the US market. So are we qualified to apply? But we've not done the testing in the US market. We've only done testing in Nigeria.
Cesare, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Clifford, I think, if you're looking at launching in North America, once you're at the point where you're looking at that as a possibility, that would be the point where we would be able to support you. That would be an area that we have expertise in. We just don't really have a lot of expertise in the Nigerian market overall. So if you're thinking about pivoting into the US market, or you have a timeline of when you might try to work for US market entry, that would be super helpful information for us to understand more about. And you could provide that to us in the stage 1 application.
Okay, then we'll take our chance and put in for the stage 1 application.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, and now for a third raised hand, whose name I am going to butcher without a doubt. And in fact, I'm not even going to, because you already know I'm talking
I'll
to you.
help you.
Tell me how to pronounce your name so that I know in the future.
It's really not that hard once you know it. It's wheat, which is like the grain and then an S.
Got it.
Yes. So it's been interesting. So thanks very much. I'm planning to apply, but I did want to check. I was looking at the previous cohorts, and I have a tech company, which doesn't quite seem to. I don't see a lot of tech companies in your previous cohorts. So I was wondering, we are focused on increasing food supply chain transparency. So I think that's why I thought this would be a nice fit. So my question is, do you consider tech companies? Okay. And the other is, can you provide a bit more information on what type of mentoring, coaching in that period in those couple of months that you will provide? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think to address the kind of tech company component, we do have a handful of tech companies in our portfolio that I can point you to. I will rattle off a few names and you can dig around our portfolio, and Cesare, of course, feel free to add to that. But I know we have Milk Run, AgriDigital, Fluorosat. Those are the three that are coming to mind for me. I know we also have Andy's Ag, which is more of a biotech, and of course Farm Generations Co-op, which is a tech platform, which was Lindsay speaking earlier today. So yes, we love to support impact-driven food and ag tech. We have one of our residents, and we have actually a portion of our work that is focused on kind of open source technology, and working with a company called FarmNG that is developing autonomous mid-size tractors for small scale farmers. So yes, we love to work in technology. It is exciting for us to learn about the opportunities that are happening out there in the space. And then to speak to the kinds of mentorship that come through the program, this is actually, it's a great question that I think is relevant to anyone who is applying to the program. The structuring of this program, particularly given that this year it will be all virtual, is going to be that we have a series. Each week we will have a couple of conversations that are focused on group learning opportunities, right? And so those are focused on kind of core competencies like communications, investment, finances, et cetera. Well, we will bring the group together to learn and grow and workshop on a specific topic. And then from there, we will also be providing mentorship opportunities that are specifically curated for the needs of the entrepreneur themselves, right? So our mentor network, we've got an incredible community of mentors and supporters and stakeholders that have been working with FS6 along the pathway. And part of our intake process for anyone who is accepted into the program is to learn about what your next milestones are, what your next challenges are, and then we actually go into our kind of little black book of mentors and figure out who is best equipped to support you on the challenges that you are facing. And then we actually do those pairings based on your needs. So I don't have a specific answer to who you would be connected with from a mentorship perspective, but just to say we have a strong bench on the technology side, and some of the other challenges that come with building a business like that. And we have, those mentors would be matched based on the questions that you were answering through your interview and intake process if you were accepted into the program. Cesare.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That sounds like a good mix of, general and specific. Yeah, okay, good. Thanks.
Just to add, I mean, this isn't, there's no homework. This isn't a make work type of program, and again, like what we're looking for is, can the kinds of communications support that we're offering, along with helping to really get clarity of thought around the types of capital you need to raise and how that relates to your business model. Are those two of the things that you're really focused on right now? And then in combination with that, and I think to answer Nancy's question here, as I know we're running out of time, are you a community change leader? Which is, our dream applicants are folks who are really committed to this work over long term. We're trying, we are building a community. We don't stop working with our cohorts after the program. We're still very much working with cohort 1. We're really building long-term relationships and community. So we're looking for people who are committed to changing the food system. Those are our dream applicants, and they come from all different walks of life. And we're working to explore the ways in which we can bring in different types of folks who may not identify as entrepreneurs so that we can further that vision for really just supporting the leaders in communities who are trying to change these systems and are going to be working on it for most likely the rest of their lives along with us.
Yes. Thank you for that, Cesare, and for answering Nancy's question in the chat box. So yeah, with that, I know we are even having added this 15 minutes at the end, we've gone over time. So thank you guys so much for sticking around with us, diving into it. I'm very excited about our stage 1 application close tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to seeing who's coming in. So if you have any questions that weren't answered on this webinar, please feel free to email us at fs6@foodsystem6.org. We will also be pulling together an overview sheet from this conversation that we will share out with attendees and applicants alike, along with the recording from this event. So that is it for us today. Thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing more from each of you in the coming months. So have a great rest of your Thursday and rest of your week.